The map crackled in my hands, a fragile relic of yellowed parchment and faded ink. I'd found it tucked inside a water-stained copy of Dante's Inferno in a forgotten corner of a Venetian antique shop, a place that smelled of salt, decay, and secrets. The proprietor, a man with eyes as old as the canals, had simply shrugged when I'd paid for the book, as if the map's existence was a matter of chance, or perhaps fate. It depicted a lagoon I thought I knew, the familiar fish, shape of Venice, but it was wrong. The outlines were distorted, and at its heart, where the Piazza San Marco should have been, was a dense cluster of islets with a name written in a spidery, urgent script: Vetus Urbis Aquarum, the old city of waters. And beside it, a single baffling phrase: "You, by via Santa Qui, et Curus Sunt Navigia, where the roads are water and the chariots are ships. My name is Dr. Alessio Rossi, and I am an historian, a skeptic by trade." But this map, with its impossible geography, hooked into my imagination like an anchor. It spoke of a Venice before Venice, a ghost city haunting the one we know. This wasn't just a research project, it was an obsession. I spent months cross-referencing, diving into city archives, reading crumbling ledgers from the Magistrato Alaiaque, the ancient Venetian water authority. The official history tells a tidy tale: refugees from the mainland, fleeing barbarian invasions in the 5th century, finding sanctuary on these muddy, isolated islands in the lagoon. They built a community that would eventually become the Serenissima Republica, the most serene Republic of Venice. But my map, and the fragments of text I began to unearth, suggested a far more complex and far more dramatic origin. The truth began not with refugees, but with survivors. Not in the 5th century, but at the bloody end of the 1st century BC. The Roman Empire was tearing itself apart in civil war. In a small, prosperous coastal town on the mainland, a place the Romans called Altinum, a man named Lucius Vabina, a former shipwright for the Roman Navy, saw the storm coming. He had served under Octavian, the future Emperor Augustus, in the naval battle of Actium. He knew the power of the sea, and he understood the safety of the marshes. When the war between Octavian and Mark Antony bled into the northern provinces, bringing with it marauding bands of deserters and vengeful legions, Lucius made a desperate decision. I found a fragmented letter, attributed to his daughter, Lavinia, preserved on a wax tablet replica in a museum in Treviso. It read, "Father says the firm ground is a death warrant. He speaks of the islands in the brine where the legions cannot march and their horses cannot charge. He says we will build not with stone and road, but with wood and water. He calls it not a retreat, but a new kind of victory." Lucius was not a poor refugee. He was a strategic visionary. He used his wealth to commission a fleet of flat-bottomed barges, not for a single escape, but for a systematic, planned migration. He didn't just lead his family. He led a consortium of merchants, shipwrights, and engineers who saw the crumbling of the old world order and bet on a new one. They didn't stumble upon the lagoon, they chose it. Its very nature was its fortress. The treacherous, shifting mudflats were a moat. The lack of fresh water was a problem to be solved with cisterns and ingenuity. The absence of roads was not an obstacle, but the entire point. This was the first hidden fact, the first crack in the official story. Venice was not born of chaotic flight, but of deliberate, brilliant design. The first settlement, which my map called Vetus Urbis Aquarum, was a carefully laid out grid of canals. The streets were waterways, precisely measured for 2 boats to pass. The foundations were not stone on solid ground, but millions of alder and larch pilings, driven deep into the compacted clay and silt. A wooden skeleton upon which a marble city would eventually be built. They built elevated wooden walkways for pedestrians, but the primary means of transport from the very first day was the boat. The currus, the chariot, of this new world was the navigium, the ship. It was a city conceived not as a human habitat imposed upon the land, but as an organism that lived in symbiosis with the sea. For decades, this proto-Venice thrived in secrecy. It became a nexus of a different kind of trade. While the Roman world focused on its land, based networks like the Via Appia, the people of the Water City mastered the silent, liquid highways of the lagoon and the coastal routes. They traded salt, fish, and a new kind of liberty. They developed a unique social structure, not based on land ownership, but on maritime skill and commercial acumen. The Doge, the future ruler, would evolve not from a king, but from a master of ships, a dux in the original maritime sense. The dramatic turning point, the moment this hidden city was forced into the light of history, came with the next great wave of invasion a few centuries later. The official narrative picks up here, with the Huns led by Attila sweeping through the north of Italy in 452 AD. Panicked refugees from cities like Aquileia and Padua did indeed flood the lagoon, but they did not find an empty wilderness. They found a fully functional, if rudimentary, aquatic society. The dialogue between the old world and the new must have been electric. I imagine a scene on a fog-shrouded morning. A flotilla of rough-hewn rafts and fishing boats, carrying the terrified, bedraggled nobility of Altinum, approaches the silent, stilt houses of the Water City. A man, gaunt and dressed in the torn robes of a Roman magistrate, stands in the lead boat and shouts across the water, "Hail! We seek sanctuary from the scourge of God. We are the people of Altinum, and we claim the rights of supplicants." From the shadows between the buildings, a different kind of figure emerges. He stands steady in a sleek, black sandalo boat, his hands calloused from rope and oar, his tunic simple but well made. This is Orso, the current master of the tides, a descendant of Lucius's original council. "We have no roads for your chariots, no land for your villas," Orso calls back, his voice calm but firm, echoing over the still water. "Our wealth is measured in knots and nautical miles. Our law is the law of the current and the tide. Can you live by it?" The magistrate sputters, "We are Romans. We bring knowledge, art, architecture. We have our own knowledge," Orso interrupts. "We know how to make the sea our shield and our sustenance. You may enter, but you will learn our ways. Your stone will be laid upon our wood. Your roads will follow our canals." This was the true birth of Venice. It wasn't a replacement of one culture by another, but a fusion. The maritime expertise of the Vetus Urbis merged with the administrative, artistic, and architectural knowledge of the Roman refugees. The newcomers learned to build with pilings and to navigate by the stars reflected on the water. The old inhabitants learned to build in stone and to think in terms of empire. Together, they created something entirely new, something the world had never seen, a maritime republic that would last for 1,000 years. But the mysteries of the old city of waters did not entirely vanish. They persisted in the foundations, both literal and cultural. The deepest mystery lies in the sottoportigos, the covered passageways that wind beneath Venetian buildings. In my quest, I learned of a legend whispered among the oldest gondoliers, a story passed down from father to son, never written in any official chronicle. They speak of a submerged level, a city sommersa, below the current city, where the original pilings of Lucius's settlement are not just wood, but are carved with strange pre-Roman symbols, a language of the sea, they say, that held the secret to binding wood and water. One evening, guided by an old man named Enzo, whose family had pulled boats for generations, I found myself in a low, damp sottoportage near the church of San Giovanni in Bregora. The air was cold and heavy with the smell of the tide. Enzo pointed a trembling flashlight beam at a massive central piling half embedded in the wall. "They say this is one of the first ones," he murmured, "the Pietra dell'Arrivo, the stone of arrival." There, just above the waterline, were carvings worn almost smooth by centuries of lapping brine. They weren't Roman letters. They were spirals and interlocking waves, and what looked like a stylized ship with a single, all-seeing eye on its prow. It was a symbol I had seen nowhere else in Roman or medieval Venetian iconography. It was a ghost, a relic of that first pure vision of a city without roads. Was it a navigational sigil, a protective charm, a signature from Lucius Vibina himself? I would never know for sure. That is Venice's final secret. It guards the soul of its origin in the silent, submerged heart of its own foundations. My journey ended where it began, on the Rialto Bridge at dawn. The rising sun turned the Grand Canal into a river of molten gold. The water buses, the delivery barges, the gondolas, they were all the direct descendants of Lucius's first fleet. I finally understood. Venice is not a city that has canals. It is a city that is a canal. Its identity is liquid. The official history of the 5th century refugees is not a lie, but it is a sequel. The prologue, the true founding, was that earlier, more radical exodus. The map I found was a key, not to a place of lost treasure, but to a lost idea. The audacious vision of a people who looked at an impossible landscape of water and mud, and saw not an obstacle, but a destiny. They built a civilization that turned its back on the land, based logic of the ancient world, and forged a new path, a liquid path, that would lead it to become the jewel of the Adriatic, the Serenissima, a city that forever proves that the most powerful roads are the ones that are not roads at all.